side in London. In for Emily Chang, happy Friday. This is Bloomberg Technology, and we are ripping up the script because an all-important meeting going on between the President of the United States, Joe Biden, and Japan's Prime Minister Suga. Of course, it is the first meeting of an international leader with the U.S. President. We will get right to it at the Rose Garden. But first and foremost, let's get straight to the U.S. markets as well. Stocks ending the week at record highs. Economic optimism coming full on from the US and indeed from China. Ed Ludlow, Kriti Gupta are standing by. Ed, do take it away.
Yeah, record highs. Investors really focus on that economic story, particularly China. China's economy growing by more than 18% in the first quarter. The S&P 500 up by 0.4%. Fresh highs notching its fourth weekly successive gain. If there's any underperformance, it was actually in tech stocks. You see the tech-heavy NASDAQ 100 up by just 0.1%, and the NYSE FANG Plus Index, that basket of kind of mega-cap tech stocks, off by 0.4%. And it was interesting, we didn't really see any movement in yields, but of course, earnings season is really around the corner. In fact, earnings season really starts in earnest for tech stocks next week, and that's where really the focus is. Investors projecting that we'll see growth, right? I think our colleagues at Bloomberg Intelligence saying that we'll see around 16% revenue growth in the technology sector, even more outside earnings growth. But there are concerns. Come with me into my Bloomberg and look at this chart. And you can see that when it comes to the NASDAQ 100 in particular, we're trading at our most expensive valuation since around 2004, 2 decades worth. And so that's been a concern, particularly at the beginning of the year when yields were rising. It was hard to justify those stretched valuations. Now, the psychology has changed because the rest of the market outside of tech is also expected to do well. Come back to me in the studio. The best two performing mega cap tech stocks of 2020 were Amazon and Apple. But you can see they've actually trailed the S&P 500 so far this year. Investors falling out of love with technology. The question: what will bring them back in love with technology? So that's what I'll be asking for the next few weeks. Kriti, what are you looking at?
Well, Ed, thank you. Well, you did see that tech underperformance, but you also saw a lot of pain here in some of those social media companies. Take a look at this. Pinterest down as much as 10%, the steepest decline since November 19th on concerns that perhaps those channel checks were relatively muted. Then you had some analysts coming in saying, well, you know what, actually, those concerns are overblown, but still not enough to really lift the stock back up. And that sentiment, of course, seeped into the likes of Snapchat and Twitter. Where you didn't see a lot of pain was actually in Amazon. We're talking about them disrupting semiconductors, for example, and several other industries. Now they're going after competing more closely with Wayfair, Best Buy, Home Depot, Lowe's, with a new premium service in which you actually can have some of those kind of new furniture items that you buy on Amazon assembled right at your home. So it really does put them kind of more in direct competition with some of those names. You can see they're really outperforming the likes of Wayfair, for example, which did actually take a hit in intraday trading. But something else that took a hit in intraday trading was, of course, those crypto stocks. Flip up the boards, and I want to show you some of the pain, and not just Bitcoin, but take a look at these crypto stocks. Marathon, Riot, not doing so well, especially for equity investors that want that exposure to Bitcoin. Today, that trade did not go well. Coinbase, on the other hand, really outperforming, a very stark contrast in terms of that crypto story. And lastly, I want to spin it forward, Caroline, to those earnings next week. Just like Ed mentioned, you saw Netflix, of course, take a little bit of a hit in line with that tech underperformance, but IBM, people actually bought. And what's interesting about IBM, we're going to get those results bright and early on Monday morning. They're actually expecting, analysts, I should say, are actually expecting a 5th straight decline in growth. So that really tells you, can IBM, I apologize, IBM come in and really prove those analysts wrong? Kind of seems like there's a little bit of optimism baked into the market today, Caroline.
Bring on the earnings season. Kriti Gupta and Ed Ludlow, thank you so much for those great updates. Meanwhile, we'll keep you up to date with what's happening in terms of President Biden. Well, wrapping up his first in-person meeting with a foreign leader. It was, of course, Japanese Prime Minister Suga. And we're going to be debating as to really what hung over the entire conversation was, well, basically the issue of China, and indeed whether or not they're going to push back against the rising power of China within the area, whether indeed we're going to see a pushback against Taiwan, and whether indeed some of the concerns about China's infiltration then in Hong Kong is something that is a key area of which they might be discussing. So too, actually, the supply chain of chips, a key issue for our global audience, of course, and something that, of course, China continues to double down on in terms of its own chip focus. I think we are just about to be seeing President Biden walking out alongside Prime Minister Suga. We will now hear what the key takeaways were from their meeting together and how they have brought about an alignment. Remember, of course, the key trading partner for Japan is that of China.
Well,
so
good afternoon.
we'll see how they continue debate. Let's
Prime
listen in.
Minister's brought the sun out, so he can do about anything. Mr. Prime Minister, thank you for being here. It's been my pleasure to welcome Prime Minister Suga to the White House. This is our first in-person meeting here, the first head of state that I've asked in my administration to come to the White House. Yoshi, thank you for making the long trip to Washington. We've already met several times virtually at a G7 meeting and a Quad Leaders Summit, but I greatly appreciate the chance to spend time with you in person and to exchange our ideas face-to-face. There's no substitute for face-to-face discussions. We are still taking COVID precautions, being careful, but our commitment to meet in person is indicative of the importance, the value we both place on this relationship between Japan and the United States, this partnership. We had a very productive discussions today. When nations as close as ours get together, we always look for operations and opportunities to do more, and today was no exception. So, Yoshi, you'll probably be seeing a lot more of me in the future. Today, Prime Minister Suga and I affirmed our ironclad support for U.S.-Japanese alliance and for our shared security. We committed to working together to take on the challenges from China and on issues like the East China Sea, the South China Sea, as well as North Korea, to ensure a future of a free and open Indo-Pacific. Japan and the United States are two strong democracies in the region, and we're committed to defending and advancing our shared values, including human rights and the rule of law. We're going to work together to prove that democracies can still compete and win in the 21st century. We can deliver for our people in the face of a rapidly changing world. So today, we're announcing a new competitive and reliance partnership, CORE, between Japan and the United States that will enhance our ability to meet the pressing challenges of our time, together meet those challenges. Top of our agenda is, of course, getting the pandemic under control and helping our friends and neighbors throughout the Indo-Pacific region to recover. Earlier this year, we, together with India and Australia, launched the landmark Quad Vaccine Partnership to expand the manufacturing of COVID-19 vaccines and assist countries throughout the region with vaccination efforts. And we agreed to enhance our support for global vaccination efforts through the ACT Accelerator and COVID facility. We're also going to do more beyond this pandemic to advance longer-term goals for health security, reform of the World Health Organization, and establishing a new partnership on health security to build better preparedness for the next pandemic, because there will be others. Secondly, Japan and the United States are both deeply invested in innovation and looking to the future. That includes making sure we invest in and protect the technologies that will maintain and sharpen our competitive edge. And those technologies are governed by shared democratic norms that we both share, norms set by democracies, not by autocracies. So we're going to work together across a range of fields, from promoting secure and reliable 5G networks to increasing our cooperation on supply chains for critical sectors like semiconductors, to driving joint research in areas like AI, genomics, quantum computing, and much more. Thirdly, our nations are committed to taking aggressive action to meet the threats of climate change. Next week, I'll be hosting the Climate Leaders Summit, which Prime Minister Suga also plans to attend, thankfully, to rally key nations of the world to making ambitious climate commitments in the lead-up to Glasgow Summit later this year. Japan and the United States are both committed to achieving net zero emissions by 2050, and we know to do that will require setting and meeting our 2030 goals. And we'll work together to advance clean energy technologies and help nations throughout the Indo-Pacific region, especially developing countries, develop renewable energies and decarbonize their economies. And finally, Both Prime Minister Suga and I value the incredible partnership that exists, not just between our governments, but between the Japanese people and the American peoples. Last month, we jointly marked the 10th year anniversary of the earthquake, tsunami, and nuclear disaster that cost so many lives in Japan. I visited that area shortly after it happened. In our private lunch, the Prime Minister and I talked about when I was Vice President visiting the families in the region to show support of the United States. We continue to mourn the loss of all those folks and to honor the extraordinary joint effort between Japan and the American people in the wake of that tragedy to recover and to rebuild. And those personal bonds of friendship and connection, they're the ones that are going to keep this alliance strong and vibrant for decades to come. And I'm especially proud that today we agreed to resume what is called the Mansfield Fellowship Program to promote people-to-people connections between our countries. Before Mike Mansfield, who was a beloved ambassador to Japan, became ambassador, he was a mentor of mine when I came to the Senate after my wife and daughter were killed. And he helped me along in ways I can't even explain in the United States Senate. And I'm proud that this legacy continues to be honored as part of the close, enduring partnership between our nations. And Yossi, I know how proud you are of the people of Japan are in you've got a Japanese boy coming over here, and guess what? He won the Masters. He won the Masters. He won the green jacket. And Matsuyama was the first Japanese player to take home that green jacket at the Masters tournament this week. So let me say congratulations, Japan, as well on that feat. Mr. Prime Minister, thank you for making the trip. I look forward to all that Japan and the United States will accomplish together in the coming years. It was a great honor having you as the first head of state in my administration. The floor is yours.
この度、ここワシントン DC への訪問と大変嬉しく思います。温かくお迎えいただいたバイデン大統領とハリス副大統領に心から感謝を申し上げます。そして準備にご尽力をいただいたすべての様に御礼を申し上げます。米国は日本の
The United States is Japan's best friend.
日米は
Japan and the U.S. are allies that share universal values such as freedom, democracy, and human rights. Our alliance has served its role as the foundation of peace and stability for the Indo-Pacific region and the world.
礎としてその役割を果たしてきましたが、今日の地域情勢や
In light of the current regional situation and the severe security environment, the importance of our alliance has reached new heights. Based on such common recognition, at today's summit, we engaged in far-reaching and candid exchange of views on each other's political principles, challenges faced in each of our nations, our common vision, and other matters. President Biden and I reaffirmed the recognitions confirmed at the Japan-US 2+2 held last month and agreed to engage in initiatives for the region based upon such recognitions. We also discussed the free and open Indo-Pacific. We agreed that while Japan and the U.S. will take the lead to promote the vision through concrete efforts, we will also cooperate with other countries and regions, including the ASEAN, Australia, and India. We also had serious talks on China's influence over the peace and prosperity of the Indo-Pacific and the world at large. We agreed to oppose any attempts to change the status quo by force or coercion in the East and South China Seas and intimidation of others in the region. At the same time, we agreed on the necessity for each of us to engage in frank dialogue with China and, in so doing, to pursue stability of international relations while upholding universal values. On North Korea, we confirmed our commitment to the CVID of all weapons of mass destruction and ballistic missiles of all ranges, and agreed to demand North Korea to fulfill its obligations under Security Council resolutions. On the issue of abduction, we reaffirmed that it is a grave human rights issue and that our two countries will work together to seek immediate resolution by North Korea. In countering North Korea and for the peace and prosperity of the Indo-Pacific, both of us recognize that trilateral cooperation, including the ROK, has never been as important as today, and agreed to promote such collaboration. Noting that the regional security environment has become increasingly severe, the deterrence and response capabilities of our alliance must be strengthened. I conveyed my resolve to reinforce Japan's defense capabilities while President Biden again demonstrated America's commitment to the defense of Japan, including the application of Article 5 of the Japan-U.S. Treaty of Mutual Cooperation and Security for the Senkaku Islands. We also agreed to accelerate the review underway between our two countries on the specific means to strengthen our alliance. At the same time, from the perspective of mitigating the impact on local communities, including first and foremost Okinawa, we agreed to promote the realignment of the U.S. forces in Japan, including the relocation of Air Station Futenma to Henoko, which is the only solution to avoid its permanent use. In responding to the unprecedented crisis faced by the international community, such as COVID-19 and climate change, Japan and the U.S. are mutually indispensable partners. President Biden and I share the recognition that our two nations bear significant responsibilities to lead multilateral initiatives toward the resolution of such issues. In this context, we agreed to respect international order based upon multilateralism and the rule of law while exercising joint leadership to build back better our global community. Based on such outcome of our meeting today, we are releasing the Japan-U.S. Joint Leaders Statement, Global Partnership for a New Era, which will serve as the guiding post for our alliance in the times ahead, which strongly demonstrates our solidarity towards the realization of a free and open Indo-Pacific. From the perspective of our two nations leading efforts to build back better, President Biden and I agreed on the Japan-U.S. core partnership and confirmed to promote cooperation in common priority areas, including promotion of competitiveness and innovation in digital science and technology, COVID-19 countermeasures, green growth, and climate change.
On competitiveness and innovation, Under the recognition that digital economy and new technologies in particular will bring about social transformation and huge economic opportunities, we have agreed that Japan and the US will work together on the promotion of R&D on various areas, including digital area and others. Regarding response to COVID-19, from short-term responses to longer-term efforts, including the preparations for future similar incidents, we will work on the promotion of multi-layered cooperations regarding the overall supply of vaccines and the reinforcement of Japan-US public and private cooperation in the area of global health. We confirmed that cooperations between our governments will continue. In order to ensure equitable access to vaccines, including access by developing countries, multilateral and regional cooperations will be promoted. On the matter of climate change, at the upcoming climate summit to be hosted by the US next week, or at COP26 and beyond, we confirmed that Japan and the US will lead the global decarbonization. In order to further strengthen cooperation in areas such as the implementation of the Paris Agreement, clean energy technologies, or decarbonization transition of developing countries, I agreed with President Biden to launch climate partnership on ambition, decarbonization, and clean energy. Under these initiatives, I wish to give impetus to concrete and comprehensive Japan-US cooperations. I discussed the increase of discriminations or violences against Asian people across the US with President Biden and agreed that discrimination by race cannot be permitted in any societies. We agreed on this regard. President Biden's comment that discriminations and violences cannot be allowed and that he firmly opposes was extremely encouraging for me, and I have renewed my confidence in American democracy once again. I told the President about my determination to realize the Tokyo Olympic and Paralympic Games this summer as a symbol of a global unity. President Biden once again expressed his support for this determination. Japan is listening to and learning from WHO and experts, doing everything possible to contain infection and to realize safe and secure games from scientific and objective perspectives. We will do our utmost in our preparation. Freedom, democracy, human rights, rule of law. As we firmly defend and uphold these universal values that Japan and the US share, I look forward to the actual implementation of the outcomes of today's significant meeting and to realize a free and open Indo-Pacific by further collaboration and deeper cooperation with Joe. I once again express my heartfelt gratitude for the kind invitation. Thank you.
Now we'll each take a few questions, and I'll begin by recognizing the Associated Press. Amir, you have the first question. There you are.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, Mr. Prime Minister. Mr. President, in your last press conference, you said successful presidents prioritize and that you were focusing your agenda on one thing at a time. And I'd like to just ask you, what would you say to many of Americans who voted for you about the legislative progress on gun control and police reform, having to wait while you pursue infrastructure? Given that we continue to see these incidents with mass shootings and also police-involved shootings, including the incident that a lot of us saw in Chicago most recently. Do you feel any need to reprioritize your agenda?
I've never not prioritized this. No one has worked harder to deal with the violence used by individuals using weapons than I have. I'm the only one ever to have passed an assault weapons ban. I'm the only one that ever had a 10-year ban on assault weapons and clips of more than 10 bullets. Immediately upon us becoming in office, having an attorney general, I asked him to put together the things I could do by executive order, including dealing with new guns that can be made, you can buy in pieces and put together, and other initiatives. I strongly support the universal background checks, which I continue to push. The Congress has to step up and act. The Senate has to act. And I strongly support and continue and never stop supporting the ban on assault weapons and magazines that hold more than 10 bullets. It doesn't mean that I can't also be working at the same time on the economy and on COVID. But it's not a question of my being able to set the agenda in the Senate as to what they will move to first. And so I continue, and I strongly, strongly urge my Republican friends in the Congress who even refuse to bring up the House-passed bill to bring it up now. This has to end. It's a national embarrassment. It is a national embarrassment what's going on. And it's not only these mass shootings that are occurring. Every single day, there's a mass shooting in the United States if you count all those who were killed out in the streets of our cities and our rural areas. It's a national embarrassment and must come to an end. And one last thing, the folks who own weapons, the folks who own guns, they support universal background checks. The majority of them think we should not be selling assault weapons. Who in God's name needs a weapon that can hold 100 rounds or 40 rounds or 20 rounds? It's just wrong. And I'm not going to give up till it's done. You have a question you want to offer? Not a question. Recognize someone, Mr. Prime Minister.
産経新聞の杉本さん。
Sankei newspaper. Thank you very much.
今回の会談では中国に関する問題が主な議題になったと思いますので、対中
China
政策
policy was one of the central agenda items. So my question is on China policy. Both governments consider that peace and stability of Taiwan is of great importance, and that had been the agreement between the two countries. What kind of exchange of views were conducted on this matter at today's meeting? In order to deter contingency in the Straits, what can Japan do? And what can Japan do when actually a contingency occurs in the Taiwan Straits? Did the Prime Minister explain to President Biden what Japan can do under such circumstances? And also, were there discussions on Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region human rights issue? Grave concern is shared by the two countries, but Japan is the only G7 country that has not imposed sanctions on China. Were you able to gain President Biden's understanding towards such position?
意見交換する中で
As we engaged in
台湾や
exchange of views over the regional situation,
ウイグル地区も巡る状況につい
we
て
also
議論を
discussed the circumstances in Taiwan and Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region as well.
やり取りの
I
差し支
refrain
えますけれ
from
ども
mentioning details since it pertains to diplomatic exchanges,
平和と安定の
but
重要性につ
there
いて
is
は
already an agreed recognition of the importance of peace and stability of the Taiwan Straits between Japan and the United States, which was reaffirmed on this occasion.
の状況についても
I also
我が国の
explained Japan's position and initiatives regarding the situation in Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region to the President, who I think understood my points.
Next question goes to Trevor, Reuters.
Thank you. Mr. President, it's been a while since we've heard an update from you on how the talks are going with Iran. How are they going, and do you regard their decision to enrich to 60% as a step backwards, as a sign that they aren't serious about those negotiations? And for the Prime Minister, just a question on whether it's irresponsible to move forward with the Olympics when you have public health experts telling you that Japan is not ready to do so. Thank you.
Let me respond to the Iran question. We do not support and do not think it's at all helpful that Iran is saying it's going to move to enrich to 60%. It is contrary to the agreement. We are, though, nonetheless, pleased that Iran has continued to agree to engage in discussions, in direct discussions with us and with our partners on how we move forward and what is needed to allow us to move back into the JOPCA so that we're part of it again, that we should have never gotten out of, in my view, without us making concessions that we're just not willing to make. And so the discussions are underway. I think it's premature to make a judgment as to what the outcome will be, but we're still talking.
If
I may invite Shintomi-san. Yes, I have a question to Prime Minister Suga regarding the Tokyo Olympics and the Paralympics planned for this summer. You have garnered support from President Biden. Did the President mention about the concrete promise to send American athletes or any positive comments? If you can tell us about the exchanges and the conversations during the meeting about the COVID-19 vaccines or about climate change. You have discussed these aspects about the schedule of providing the vaccines, or by 2030, the reduction target of the gases. Any numerical targets or actions were discussed, please? As was mentioned at the beginning, I expressed my determination to realize the Tokyo Olympics and the Paralympic Games as a symbol of global unity this summer, and President Biden once again expressed his support. Japan will continue careful and full preparation in order to realize the Tokyo Games this summer, in order to ensure equitable access to vaccines for COVID-19. We also affirmed that Japan and the US will continue our cooperation. Regarding the climate change, this is a matter that both President Biden and I emphasized. So during the talk today, we have confirmed to strengthen bilateral cooperation and collaboration in the area of climate change, and have agreed to launch the Japan-US Climate Partnership, which is extremely meaningful and significant.
Well, thank you all very much. Thank you, Mr. Prime Minister. I look forward to having you back. Thank you again, everyone.
Ladies and gentlemen, please remain in your seats until the President, the Prime Minister, and delegations have departed.
You have been listening, to, of course, to Prime Minister of Japan, Suga, and President Biden discussing a whole wide range of elements, whether it's from the Tokyo Olympics through to 5G, AI, chip supply, of course, crucially important to our Bloomberg Technology viewers, and indeed then the relationship that they are striking when it comes to North Korea, when it comes to China. Jordan Fabian, Bloomberg White House reporter, was listening in. Your key takeaways, Jordan, from that press conference?
Well, my first takeaway is the White House must be relieved they were not asked about the most controversial subject today, which was the president's decision to keep Donald Trump's refugee cap in place and then going back on that reversal and saying that they will raise the cap later this year. That was a major black eye for the White House earlier today. They received some major backlash from Democrats who said they were surprised the White House wasn't going to lift that cap and then they went ahead after receiving that criticism. But the president didn't receive questions on that at the press conference. Instead, reaffirming the alliance with Japan, going up against China, and talking about gun control and his negotiations or his hope that he can get a new nuclear deal with Iran.
Yeah, any news really breaking from that? Of course, Iran saying the US is pleased Iran is going to continue indirect talks. That seemed to be the foreign policy takeaway from the discussion.
Yeah, I mean, the major takeaway from that subject is that Iran's decision to enrich uranium to 60% apparently isn't going to completely derail these indirect talks that are going on in Vienna. That Biden saying that the U.S. doesn't support those enrichment standards, but there's still hope that they can come to some sort of an agreement, or at least begin direct talks about some sort of agreement down the road.
I have to say, it's so sad to the reality that's still being discussed. Of course, Biden saying that mass shootings are a national embarrassment within that press conference. And indeed, Prime Minister Suga having to discuss violence aimed at Asians in the U.S. as well with Biden. How much do you think that this is something that the White House is focused on?
It's certainly a major focus for the White House, and not necessarily by their own choosing. It's the spate of mass shootings and also the violence that has been seen against Asian Americans during the coronavirus pandemic has sort of thrust this issue onto President Biden's plate. But that being said, he's trying to address it through executive orders. The Congress is apparently going to act on a new hate crime bill for the hate crimes against Asian Americans. But gun control will, of course, be a heavier lift in the U.S. Congress. But then again, this is not an unusual thing for when a foreign leader comes to meet with the U.S. president at the White House. Often domestic issues will come up at these press conferences.
But of course, international was the focus. And we know that the discussions between Japan and US usually focus in on trade, but this time very much focused in on the relationship with China. Suga was saying that they discussed the Taiwan situation with Biden in particular. Also, he voiced some concerns about human rights. What do you think was the takeaway? If the Chinese were listening into this press conference, anything that they would have been particularly concerned about or not?
Maybe not necessarily one comment or another, but I think it is symbolic that President Biden has chosen his first two in-person meetings with foreign leaders to be with the Prime Minister of Japan, and then also coming up later in a few weeks, the leader of South Korea coming to the White House to meet with Joe Biden. So sending a signal to the U.S. president is early on that he is going to take a united front, or at least try to, with his allies in the region to counter China. So if there's any message that Beijing is going to take away from these meetings, that will be it.
And I'm sure our technology-focused audience very much focusing on the 5G supply chains, chips, AI, also being discussed with Japan. We want to thank so much John and Fabian there for staying with us and covering that White House press conference from a rather beautiful Rose Garden. Meanwhile, let's get an update on the latest tech news. Here's Bloomberg's Ed Ludlow in San Francisco. Take it away, Ed.
Yeah, it's a case of another day, another direct listing, and it's Squarespace this time, the website hosting service that has filed for a direct listing on the NYSE, confirming a Bloomberg scoop earlier. It's interesting, so much focus around direct listings because of Coinbase. But when you get your S1 filing, you learn a lot about a company. And 2020 was pretty kind to Squarespace. Revenue up 28% to bringing net income of $31 million. But what was also interesting is it wants to move into e-commerce, and it made $143 million in sales with its e-commerce business. Why direct listings, right? Why this direct listing thing? Flip up the boards and take a look. It's been a hot move for a lot of tech startups over the last 12 months. You can see Palantir, Asana, Roblox, all opting for direct listings on the NYSE. Only Coinbase going for the NASDAQ. Coinbase was the first major direct listing on the NASDAQ, of course, and Squarespace choosing the NYSE. A direct listing because they don't feel they need to raise money, because there is a shorter roadshow with investors allowing you to do it quicker. And also you save on banking fees. One interesting reason to go down that route, it's just cost efficient. But doesn't mean that the good old traditional IPO is not a good move. Flip up the boards for a final time. I love this story. Tiny IPOs, tiny IPOs. Esports Technologies IPO'd yesterday, $6 a share. 2 trading sessions. We're up 322%, Caroline. Follows in the wake, in the footsteps of Utime. That's the Chinese mobile phone and accessories maker that IPO'd just last week at $6 a share. That's quite a return. Up 1,000%. Yes, we're talking small change. But what we're hearing from market participants is there might be an element of FOMO with this, that investors look at the opportunity that these tiny tech IPOs represent, and they want to get in on it. Really fascinating stories to cover. Lots of activity in the market. And so far, a pretty good year for US IPOs.
Blimey, next you'll be talking about Dogecoin. Ed Ludlow, we thank you on all things small listings. Meanwhile, coming up, well, we're looking at the eye in the sky and how one company is providing the tools and resources to analyze satellite imagery to fight climate change and much more. We're speaking with CEO Planet, that's Will Marshall, on how his company is taking imagery analysis to new heights. That's next. This is Bloomberg. Now, every year, the Bloomberg New Energy Forum identifies pioneers in the climate space that have made impactful and original technology innovations, bringing us closer to a low-carbon economy. This year, pioneers range from automation and machine learning in the trucking industry, for example, to key advancements in plastics recycling, to monitoring changes in the Earth from satellite imaging. Now, one of those key companies in satellite imagery is Planet, one of the recipients of the Pioneer title, builds and operates the largest Earth observation fleet of satellites and images the Earth every single day, grabbing historical context and forecasting real-world events.
What we can do is look at a given port, and we can understand the number of container ships going in and out of that port, and we can count the number of containers coming in and out of every ship. Lots of activity means it's going to be a good year for the economy. Less activity may mean it's going to be a bad year for retailers.
Let's get more insight as to exactly what the company does, the areas that it's expanding. CEO Will Marshall is with us. Thank you very much indeed. Congratulations. Always great to have a company being listed as a pioneer, I'm sure. Just remind us exactly what excites you. What is Planet doing from your perspective that's different?
Well, firstly, thanks very much for the award. Really excited to be that participant. What Planet is doing that's different is we put 200 satellites into orbit, ones like these behind me, shoebox-sized satellites with cameras that take images of the entire Earth's landmass once per day. So think of it like the satellite layer on Google, but updated every day. And what we're doing with that is democratizing access to satellite imagery. Now, what's really exciting is really less so much the satellites than all the value proposition down on the Earth. And I can tell you about some of those.
Tell us about some of them, because I know you're looking at methane, carbon, you're looking at real-world implications for farming, for example. Dig into some of the real-world ways in which people are using Planet's analysis.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, they produce imagery like the imagery you can see just behind me. We cover the whole Earth every day, and what we can see is all change. The kind of use cases that's used for is in agriculture, where we can help farmers improve crop yield, because we can actually tell crop yield in every pixel, every 3 by 3 meter pixel, and help the farmer decide when to add fertilizer, when to add water, when to harvest. And that can improve crop yields by 20 or 40%. Example customer in that case is Corteva, that use it across a large agricultural region. State and local governments use our data to monitor wildfires. We have a project called the California Forest Observatory that looks at wildfires, not just helping the firefighters when fires occur, but also looking for future fodder for future fires, like where's there's too much bush and other material that needs to be cut back. We also work with companies like Google on updating their maps. So mapping is a big use case as well. And many humanitarian projects like tracking deforestation around the world. We have a big project with Norway that is helping to sponsor access to data to 64 tropical countries to track deforestation, not just to know it's a problem at the end of the year, but to track every single tree and see if there's deforestation and then stopping it inside the decision-making loop before it really gets going. And so these are the kind of use cases.
What's also interesting is you've been weighing in terms of the global nature of what you do. You're obviously serving people in Norway. You're looking across the US and different governments. We've just come off the back of a press conference between Japan's leader and the US, talking primarily about China, really. China, the US, bit of a space race going on. I know you've just written a thought leadership piece in Time magazine, really laying out your viewpoint that cooperation is what is needed here. Are you seeing cooperation at the moment, Will?
In much of the world, the space cooperation is happening, but it's not really happening between the US and China right now. And this is the point of the article, was to point out that it'd be a good thing. The US and the Soviet Union managed to collaborate in space despite a lot of the tensions and during the height of the Cold War. So it started with the Apollo-Soyuz mission, where the US and Russia docked 2 spacecraft together, again, right in the height of this Cold War. And then that led later to the International Space Station, which was built cooperatively between Russia and the US. And they helped each other fly astronauts to the space station and so on, and when their systems didn't work, and they built that cooperatively together despite highs and lows of that relationship. Arguably, it's a good time for the US and China to think that, to take the, this could be a high ground area where we continue to work together despite some of our terrestrial differences.
Pioneering thought there, and just looking at some of the view of what you're actually putting into space right now. Our audience is able to see these sort of shoebox-sized satellites being hurtled into space and the data that you're gathering. Fascinating. Will Marshall, thank you so much for being with us, and congratulations again, Planet CEO there. Plenty more coming up for you right after the break. This is Bloomberg. So over the past several decades, the US has been at the forefront of the world's technological innovation, but it's facing increased competition from China, from Europe. Bloomberg's Emily Chang recently talked global competition and cooperation with Greylock partner and LinkedIn co-founder Reid Hoffman.
Look, I'm generally positive about rise of the tech industry for kind of positive implications of the world. And I think one of the things we want to get to with China is co-opetition, not just competition, not just challenge, but I do think that, like, for example, if you go around to a lot of very smart people in Silicon Valley and say, 20 years from now, how would you bet between Silicon Valley and China? A lot of people say, well, China, they're, a lot of really smart people, a lot of really smart engineers, a lot of innovation going on. The game's on. We have some advantages. They have some distinct advantages. And so I think that it's really important that we pay attention to as a country to say, look, technology is going to dictate the infrastructure of the world, right? And you see elements of it in 5G and chips and kind of, and Huawei and other kinds of things. And it's like, look, if you want to be playing in the infrastructure of the world game, we need to be, kind of contenders and leaders in the technological space. And I think that if we get too internally focused, we can lose that. And then it's China's game.
You've been much more openly political over the last several years. And I wonder, is there one thing, if there is one thing the Biden administration could do that would make a difference for the tech industry? What do you think that would be?
Well, look, I think the Biden administration, almost by just being them, will make a big difference. Rule of law, kind of stability, no random tweets. No random like kind of attacks on our allies. All the list goes on and on. Like, hey, let's listen to the medical experts when a pandemic happens and pay attention early to that, and not try to say, hey, you can solve your pandemic by injecting bleach, your disease. And so just by being them, there's going to be a huge amount. If I were to give one piece of advice to the Biden administration, what I would say is, look, the tech game is not guaranteed. We are not, while over the last few decades, the US has been blessed with a very robust tech industry. By the way, it came a lot from the universities and financing and else, but it's no longer, kind of like we've eaten all that seed corn. And so to pay attention to it is something that actually, in fact, if you want it for the next 30 to 50 years, maybe even the next 10 to 20, it's something to invest in and partner with. Doesn't mean listen to, do only what they say. It should be a partnership. It should be a dialogue for the better society. But it's an important part of the solution.
how Facebook and Twitter decide to moderate or not content on their platform might be their biggest test of the next decade. I mean, do you think it was the right decision to boot Trump for good?
Roughly speaking, yes. And here's a simple reason why, which is he was advocating violence. He says, oh, I wasn't really. But it's like, no, you were advocating violence. And we even saw elements of it, all the way back to Charlottesville, let alone the insurrection. Now, if they could reliably get him to say, hey, I won't do it again, then maybe it wouldn't be boot for good. But he doesn't keep his deals. He doesn't even pay the people who work for him on their last paycheck, right? For small businesses and other people. So since he won't keep his deals, then you can't reliably have him come back in and say, I'm not going to advocate for violence. So, I think it made sense. It's regrettable. It's concerning, of course, because we wouldn't want any major political figures to be, to be in that space. But I think that non-advocacy of violence is a very important thing.
What do you think the next big social platform will be?
Well, there's already a few in the sides. There's a gaming one with Roblox. There's a neighborhood one with Nextdoor. There's various of these that are in motion.
There's TikTok. There's Discord.
Yep.
Snap just hit $100 billion valuation, which was surprising.
Yes, exactly. And one of the things, maybe the right way to think about the great question you just asked me is to say, it used to be there was kind of like one at a time, right? And now there's so much going on in tech. The answer is, how many will there be, right? Like what's the number of them versus the one, and what's the different vectors that they'll be operating on, right? Because, like, for example, will we now have augmented reality through mobile phones? That's going to be the next social platform, like those kinds of things. Actually, in fact, might be, because there's so much happening in tech, that might actually be the actual shape of the answer.
Reid Hoffman, Greylock partner there. You can catch more of that interview at Bloomberg.com. Meanwhile, that does it for this edition of Bloomberg Technology. Much more ahead with the start of Wall Street Week with David Weston, tonight's guest, former Treasury Secretary Larry Summers, as always, and Bank of America CEO Brian Moynihan on the heels of the bank's earnings. And next week, Bloomberg Technology will bring you a special series on the most downloaded app of 2020. It was TikTok. We'll talk the social media app's popularity, as well as angles like regulation, diversity, and the emergence as an e-commerce platform. We have some of the biggest influencers and content creators lined up. You do not want to miss the series all week long here on Bloomberg Technology. Meanwhile, thanks for joining. This is Bloomberg.